Hello, hello. Welcome to Career Circles Workshop. Crush every interview every time. I'm excited to have you here as we explore strategies for confidently acing your interview. Whether you're switching industries or advancing in your current field, today's session will equip you with practical insights and interactive activities to help you take the next step confidently. We are currently recording this webinar to ensure accessibility for all participants. You can also enable closed captioning via your browser. We recommend using Google Chrome, where you can click on the three dots in the upper right-hand corner, click on Settings, and then Accessibility. You may refer to the screenshot in the presentation, reference a breakdown of instructions on how to access closed captioning on different browsers in the content section to your right, or reach out to one of our esteemed and amazing Career Circle employees in the tech support booth in the lobby to assist you. All of the resources that we discussed today and more can be located on the content tab near the people and discussion feed to your right. All resources and the recording will be emailed to you after the event. I repeat, all resources and the recording will be emailed to you after the event. Please make sure to watch until the end, as our amazing panelist has a wealth of knowledge to share. Before we get started with introductions, here's a QR code for our survey. You can open it on your phone and share your feedback with us. We'll be doing a raffle with all respondents, and one of you will win a Career Circle tote bag. The winner will be contacted next Friday, June the 20th. If you miss it, no worries. We'll send the survey in our post-event email too. But if you want to give us your thoughts during the event, we'd love to hear from you. Now, with that being said, I would like to introduce myself and then the esteemed and amazing and wonderful Ethan Parker, who's going to be our resident panelist and guru on all things crushing the interview. My name is Brittany Knowles. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am wearing a blonde highlighted bob with clear cat eye glasses. I am wearing a smile with a glossed lip. And I'm going to turn this over to our one and only, none other than Ethan Parker, who is our panelist for today. Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you, Brittany, and thanks everybody for having me today. Yes, name is Ethan Parker. I head up all of the recruiting efforts here at Career Circle. I am a white male in my 30s with short brown hair, some thin silver framed glasses, and also similarly to Brittany, wearing a smile just under those glasses. I have today a black Career Circle t-shirt on, coming fresh from the Career Circle Swag Factory.
Thank you so much, Ethan. We're super excited to start this conversation. Let's begin by outlining strategies to put in place before your interview to increase your chances of success.
Of course. So preparation before the interview is really key to make sure that you feel good about winning the interview in that context. You'll want to really take the time to set yourself up for success, to give yourself more confidence when you're actually sitting in the hot seat, so to speak. So when it comes to preparing for the interview, there's a couple key things to cover. The first of which is really thorough research of the organization. So you'll want to take the time to do a couple basic Google searches, maybe check into their LinkedIn, take some time to see how maybe they position themselves. But more to the point, you'll want to understand the company's core mission. So really how they're trying to get themselves to market, their values. A lot of the times they'll have like a value statement either on their website or in their professional social media. Their culture and recent news, of course. So this will be anything that's happened with the organization recently, any accolades they may have learned, and just general things that are going on with the company. That research sometimes, or more often than not, I would say, you can bring up in the interview, and it shows the person that you're speaking with that you have strong interest in the company beyond the scope of just like, essentially, I'm looking to get a job here. Understanding the role thoroughly, of course, is also key to winning an interview. You'll want to take the time to really review that job description in great detail, think through those required skills, and gain an understanding of what is necessary for the job. Conversely, if there are things that aren't super clear in the job description, this is where you can take the time to prepare some questions ahead of time. We'll get to that in just a second here, but the questions that you will ask are just as important as the questions that will be asked of you in an interview setting. Practicing those common questions. So taking some time to review just general interview collateral. We have some great resources on Career Circle's website in our interview prep modules. You want to prepare those answers for frequently asked questions. So think things like, tell me about a time where you had to de-escalate a client situation or something along those lines. We have some great examples outlined in that interview prep module. And then additionally, there are some resources that you can use to kind of pseudo role play an interview. And we'll highlight those resources a little bit later on as well. As mentioned previously, you'll want to take some time to prepare questions for the position itself. So be thoughtful about not just the position and the work that you'll be doing, but about the research that you've done into the organization. So if you see that they've recently won awards, you can take the time to, one, congratulate them, of course, on that, but ask them a little bit more about the work that went into winning those awards. Additionally, one great thing that I try to advise most candidates on when they are in that interview setting is asking questions about the interviewer. Ask questions about their career trajectory within the organization that they're working in, and more to the point, kind of what got them there, right? What they're excited about when it comes to working every day at XYZ organization. Those questions make the dialogue a lot more intentional. And one, obviously indicates strong interest in not just like the company itself and your role there, but what it looks like for other people who work there. But two, indicates it helps you stand out more in the interviewer's mind, because at that point, it's less of a transactional, like I'm interviewing you for a job, and more like a conversation. Humans tend to remember the conversations that they have with others a lot more deeply than they would of just like, I say one thing, you give me an answer. Reviewing your resume, of course, is key to winning any interview. You want to make sure that you take the time to be prepared to speak through your experience. So take some time, especially like in the days leading up to an interview, to really read through your resume and be prepared to articulate key examples where you demonstrated competencies related to your experience. Mock interviews, of course, are really, really helpful. They can help to really build a lot of confidence prior to your interview. So just make you feel a little bit more comfortable in your own shoes, so to speak. And you can practice mock interviews with anybody, really. We mentioned previously there's digital resources that you can take advantage of, namely AI is a great resource. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you can practice with a peer, a friend, mentor. We also, of course, offer career coaching sessions here at Career Circle, so you can feel free to set up time with one of our career coaches to go through those mock interviews. Great way to kind of get some additional proficiency and come in ready to win. Lastly, knowing the interview format, there is a lot of power in this. It gives you a lot of additional confidence just knowing what to expect within an interview. So take the time to try to understand on the front end if it will be with a panel, if it is a one-on-one interview, or if it's conversing virtually or over the phone. That additional little bit of information can go a long way towards making sure that you feel prepared to win the interview, and more to the point, get you kind of in the right mind frame, depending on who you're going to be speaking with and what format you'll be speaking with them in. So bread and butter stuff here. Now that we are actually in the interview, we're talking to hiring managers, we're talking to people who would be possibly even doing this job on the day-to-day. A couple key things to keep in mind here. One is always arrive early. When we use the term arrive here, this can take the shape of a couple different things, especially in the age of technology. Arriving early to a virtual interview can be as simple as making sure that you are signed on to your computer, signed on to the relevant software, whether it's Teams, Zoom, whatever video conferencing software they may be using to facilitate your interview. Make sure you take the time to sign on early, make sure all your technology is working, all that good stuff. Cannot tell you the amount of times where interview experience went poorly because a candidate did not make sure that stuff was ready prior to their call. So just take the time to make sure everything's functional, good to go. Conversely, of course, if you're in person, take the time to arrive in the parking lot 10 to 15 early. Especially in the event that you feel a little bit nervous. I find that both as a person who has interviewed plenty of times and a person who has coached people on interviews, I will say taking that extra time to yourself, like in the car prior to walking in, just to review your resume, kind of go over your talking points, go over your questions one more time, and really like get yourself in the zone, are very, very helpful and kind of or just tremendously, what's the term I'm looking for? Confidence inducing, I guess, and really helps you to tee up your talking points while you are in the interview itself. Of course, lastly, the last method that there would be interviews here would be like phone screenings. Similarly, take the time to set yourself up in a quiet area, review your experience, review your questions, very similar to what I just described in the parking lot example, just within the context of wherever you may be for your phone interview. Next, you'll want to make sure that you're dressing appropriately. Again, there's some variance here, of course. If you're in a phone screening, this is maybe a little bit less applicable, but we do still recommend that you dress professionally, even if it is a virtual or phone interview. Obviously, virtual, you'll be on camera. You want to make sure that you are presenting your best self to the people that you're interviewing with. But more to the point, there's some psychological power in dressing for the role that you want to be in. It's not exactly a new saying, but it inspires like a lot of confidence in yourself to like look at yourself and know like, oh, I would absolutely hire me, right? So there's a good effect to making sure that you are, again, fully in that zone, fully prepared to win the interview, and kind of treating all your interviews with the same level of preparation, whether it's a phone screening, virtual, or on site. Making sure that you're listening carefully, of course, in the interview itself is super, super important. You'll want to make sure that you are really paying attention to the questions and taking a moment to consider the question fully before you answer it. There is no shame as well. I will say, people have asked this question previously. You'll want to, if you did not really fully understand the question the first time it was asked, there's no shame in asking them to repeat the question. The interviewer would much rather you take the time to answer the question completely and to the best of your ability. So if you're operating under a lack of information, you can't do that. So if you don't understand the question or you just need some additional clarity, there's no problem with asking the interviewer to either restate or rephrase the question. And then in that same vein, when you are about to answer the question, there's no problem with taking a second to slow down and say, oh, let me think about that for just a second, especially if they're asking you for some kind of specific example about your work experience. Showing enthusiasm, of course, is always important. You've probably heard other coaches say something along the lines of like smiling a lot and talking into a mirror, things like that. It helps to get your tone right before an interview. That enthusiasm can take the shape of a lot of things, right? So it's also equally important to show up like authentic, because if you're too worried about putting on a front of like being enthusiastic, etc., that can also be, problematic. It's not true to yourself. It's harder for you to give authentic answers. And a lot of the times, again, an interview is more conversation than anything else, of not just if you will be a fit for the company, but whether or not you want to work at the company. So take the time to be enthusiastic about the opportunity as best you can, but also, mingle it with your own personal style. Asking a lot of questions, of course. Again, I can't overstate, this is very, very important in most interview contexts. Asking insightful questions can be something that really helps you to stand out from other applicants. And insightful can mean a lot of things in this context. It can mean insightful in the sense that you are very interested or trying to gain a greater understanding of not just the company, but your role within the company and how this role can help a company achieve its goals. It can be insightful in the sense of you want to gain a greater understanding of how you would fit into a specific team setting or the people that you would be working with on a day-to-day basis and how you're all working towards a collective goal. And then, of course, it can also be insightful in the sense of personally. You'll take the time to get a greater understanding of the person that you're sitting across from and just learning more about the work that not only they do, but what got them to that point. Being honest, of course, we always recommend that you answer questions truthfully and authentically. You've heard me use that word a couple times now. Being true to yourself is one of the most important things that you can do in the interview setting, because again, it is, while you are there, of course, to put on, a professional show, so to speak, it's also very important that you don't misrepresent yourself in a way that would cause problems for you once you do get the job. So in an event where you present your skills or present your personality in a way where, this is kind of what led to you winning the job, it can then be expected of you, obviously, over time as you continue to engage with the company and you continue to do your job functions. So it's much, much better on the front end to be authentic, to present yourself as, truthfully as you can. And again, just try to treat the interview as more of a dialogue or a conversation than just like I'm answering questions that the interviewer is asking me. The behavioral interview questions, well, these are, we'll have a bit more content about this a little later on in the presentation, but behavioral interview questions are essentially questions, or they're open-ended questions that an interviewer or recruiter will ask to kind of get a sense for how you will react when given a certain situation. So you may have heard questions like, tell me about a time where you had a time-sensitive project and you were behind on your deadline and what you did to meet it. There's a specific method that should be used to answer these questions called the STAR method. That stands for situation, task, action, and result. Again, we'll get to that in a slide here in just a little bit, but that's a method that you'll want to lean on pretty heavily when it comes to that, because it, one, helps you to stay kind of on rails with your answer and provide a concise, succinct answer to a full point of resolution for the interviewer's question, but also it can be helpful to kind of frame your experience in that way. So it'll give the employer a sense of like, this is how I would react in these situations, and this is how I have reacted. And then, of course, being concise, again, just said this here, keeping those answers focused and relevant is very, very important. It's sometimes difficult, of course, when you have, especially if you've been working for a long time, you have a litany of experience to draw from. It's very important to make sure that you are focused on the question itself. So this is where like really making sure that you're listening carefully to the question that's being asked is important. But make sure that you are keeping the answers like relevant to the question that's being asked. The elevator pitch, of course, this is where a person would ask you something like, oh, tell me a little bit about yourself. Your elevator pitch is kind of like, you'll picture you're in an elevator with a person, you got 30 seconds to tell them about yourself, essentially. You want to keep it to like, 30 seconds to 1 to 2 minutes tops, right? This is where you kind of can just let your personality shine a little bit, let it flow, all that good stuff. We're going to get to that in another slide here in just a second as well. So what goes into an elevator pitch, right? There are three key categories here, if you will. The first of which is, of course, your intro and your purpose. So who are you? What are you trying to do? And who are you speaking with, right? Because you'll kind of tailor the elevator pitch to be a bit different based off who you're talking to, right? Like there's a slight difference in like talking to a recruiter versus a hiring manager. So you'll kind of want to factor that in as you do have that conversation with folks, but your intro won't ever change too much. My name is Ethan Parker. I am the digital recruiting manager here at Career Circle. I've been in the recruiting space for about 8 years now. That's kind of a solid intro, right? Gives you information about who I am, what I do, and how long I've been in the space for. The one thing that you don't have here is purpose. I'm looking to move into a director role in the near future, right? So you highlight basically that key career interest. Your past and present, this is where you'll kind of quantify that bit, right? So where I said I have 8 years of experience in the recruiting space, this is where you'll highlight that work experience specifically, and then additionally anything else that has been a key contributing factor to your professional experience in the space. So if there's volunteer work, hobbies or interests, strength, skills, or accomplishments, this is where you'll kind of highlight those. In my 8 years in recruiting, I have been a top producer individually, and since I've stepped into leadership for the team, I've led my team to several record-breaking years of placements. Again, keeping it short, concise, and sweet, tells them a little bit about my experience, and this is kind of a different example where I'm highlighting my experience as both an individual producer and as a leader, right? So if you have that leadership experience, make sure you take the time to quantify that as well. Lastly here, your future. So this is where you'll kind of talk through those career goals. You notice I mentioned the title previously. You'll want to express interest in the roles, organizations, the programs. So this is where you'll kind of tie it into that research that you did. I'm very interested in Career Circle because XYZ reason, right? And then you can kind of highlight at the end of this, you can ask the person that you're speaking with is like, hey, is there anything I didn't maybe cover in this? So anything that you're interested in learning more about me, or did anything that I say kind of leave too much room for error, so to speak? So if I'm talking about my future, I'm actually currently targeting director level positions. I learned a little bit more about Career Circle online, was really interested in their mission to work with all these different communities to help everyone, have an opportunity to get to work as soon as possible. Is there anything else about my work experience that you'd be more interested in learning about? That last piece, again, this is an elevator pitch in the event that you are not already in the interviewing context. This is kind of like networking purposes. You don't need to ask the last question in the event that you are actually sitting in the interview. You're there for a reason. A couple key elevator pitch mistakes. So a couple of things here, of course, is too long or too short. We did talk a little bit about being concise. Um, you want to make sure that you keep it focused on the task at hand, right? So making sure that intro is kind of where you'll have the ability to save the most time in the event that you're having more difficulty keeping it succinct. Generally, 1 to 4 sentences for your intro, completely fine, right? Like you'll want to give yourself just a quick intro, who I am, what I do, how long I've been doing it, and what I'm looking for, right? So you call that like 1 to 4 sentences. Usually you can save some good time there. The rest of it is where you'll want to kind of leave more space to breathe more often than not, because that's where it kind of changes a little bit based off of who you're talking to. Too short, on the other hand, can come across as overly nervous, things like that. You want to make sure that you're kind of striking that sweet spot between 1 to 3 minutes. In the event that you are on the shorter side of things, try to pad out that middle content. So like, hey, here's a few more of the things that I've done in my career. I've talked to XYZ people, gotten this many people to work, quantify your accomplishments up to this point, right? So like talk through any time that you've been a top performer, anytime you've led others, anything that you're overly passionate about in your career. That's where you can kind of pad your length a little bit. Second piece here is making your elevator pitch overly personal. So this is where you can kind of, we talked a little bit about like hobbies and interests previously. This is where if you don't control that, it can kind of spiral and take your length to be kind of way too much. And more to the point, it's giving the interviewer some information that really isn't super relevant to your candidacy for the position. And so you want to make sure that you are keeping the content that you're sharing focused to the conversation. Not knowing the audience, again, this is where that research is really important, and getting an understanding of who you're going to be speaking with in the interview format itself. Take the time when you are doing that research on the front end to get an understanding of not just the names and the format of who you'll be interviewing with, but look them up on LinkedIn. Take the time to look at what the work that they do is, how they tie into the company. That way you can kind of tailor your elevator pitch to the audience itself. 4, this is one that people generally struggle with, and it's completely understandable. It's a new skill, so a lot of the times we as humans tend to lean into memorizing the speech instead of letting it come authentically as we're talking to others. So it's very important to memorize it to a certain extent, right? Especially from like a framework perspective, talking through that intro, middle content, and then your resolution of all that. But it's important to leave space in the elevator pitch to breathe, right? From a conversational perspective, because again, if I'm just coming to you as a person and I spout off like a quick 1 to 2 minute, like memorized several lines of speech, it doesn't come across as overly authentic. And it can be kind of transactional, especially in an interview context. So you want to avoid that and make sure that you leave enough space to breathe conversationally. So take the time to not necessarily memorize the speech, but try to memorize the high notes. So like who you are, what you're doing, what you're targeting, and some of the key accomplishments that have gotten you to the place that you're in. And then lastly, of course, you want to be you want to be concise with it. So making sure that you are curating the content to who you're speaking with, what qualifies you for the position that you have applied for, and then of course not being vague with that. So providing those quantifications of the work that you've done up to this point, especially if you have any kind of key figures, percentages of growth, numbers of things that you have done, any way to quantify the work that you've done is very, very helpful when you're going through your elevator pitch. Give me just a moment to get some life back in the vocal cords with some water. We're going to talk a little bit more about the STAR method here. So again, defining this, STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So first part of this is the situation, of course. So whenever somebody asks you a question, especially in these open-ended vein, so kind of these things of like, tell me about a time or describe a situation where, you'll want to take the time to consider, of course, first the situation. You want to set the scene and give the necessary details of your example. So this is where you'll take the time to think about your work experience, think about an example of basically how you use the skills directly that they're asking about. So again, just kind of giving an example here. The example we used previously was, tell me about a time where you were behind on a time-sensitive project and what you did to meet your deadline. Me personally, working in recruiting, we have a lot of time sensitive deadlines. Of course, people need candidates by certain dates in order to not miss certain goals internally for organizations. So in this particular case, we had a client who needed candidates basically by the end of the month. And so I've set the scene here, right? I've told them, like, I have a client who needed candidates by this time. The next step of this is the task. So this is where I'm describing my personal responsibility in the situation, right? Or essentially what I was accountable for the situation itself. My role as a recruiter at the time, I needed to find a candidate before that deadline and make sure that they were sourced, screened, and then thoroughly vetted before giving them to the client. So they didn't have to spend as much time interviewing them because we were on a much tighter timetable at this stage, right? So fully, again, end to end, describing my responsibility and what I was accountable for in the role. Moving into the action, we'll take the time to describe the steps that I took to address that responsibility. Essentially, what I did was tailor a very specific sourcing strategy to make sure that I was getting the most qualified candidates possible on the front end. And then I conducted a little over 40 calls in a week to try to ensure that I was casting the widest net possible, essentially, of qualified talent. And then from there, in those screening calls, I was able to identify a candidate who was a great fit for the position, had met all the prerequisites for what they were looking for, had a great personality, was able to articulate their skills very well, and I felt confident that they would win the interview. Essentially, from there, I took that candidate through an interview with myself, kind of like a mock interview, and then represented their skills to the hiring manager. From there, right, we've now fully end-to-end highlighted like my actions and then what I did. So from the point of just trying to find the candidates, I then move them all the way to getting them submitted to the client. At the end here, you want to highlight the results. So this is the quantifiable impact of that situation, right? So as a result of my actions, the candidate interviewed with the client. It was a great experience. The client was super, super eager to get the candidate onboarded, ready to go. We were able to coordinate with them and essentially work with both the candidate and the clients to find an offer that made the most sense for both parties. Got the offer out to the candidate, and they accepted right there on the spot. So again, all the way end to end, I've highlighted the situation itself. I've taken the time to really establish the context, kind of what was at stake, so to speak. I've highlighted what I was personally accountable for in this situation. I then highlighted what I did to resolve what I was accountable for. And then lastly, and most importantly, in a lot of cases, you want to highlight the results. What speaks most to an interviewer, especially in like a professional context, is what the results of your actions were, how you impacted the organization at the end of the day. And so one of the biggest things that we do, of course, recommend to candidates is practice, 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 right? There are a lot of resources out there where you can learn a little bit more about commonly asked interview questions, both within and without of the technical space, right? So you can take the time to, one, of course, consult with those resources and try to research those interview questions. But practicing now, especially with so much more access to technological solutions that can kind of help to prepare you for an interview, using like AI tools to kind of go back and forth and say like, hey, you be the interviewer, I'll be the interviewee, and I'm going to ask questions. And then asking the AI to give you feedback on the answers that you give can be a really helpful way. Of course, we've already mentioned previously leaning on your support network, so your friends, mentors, and then of course, us here at Career Circle, we are happy to help with any kind of interview preparation from that lens. So just researching and practicing those common interview questions can go a long way. Practicing, of course, that elevator pitch, and then the latter part of this, timing how long it takes you to answer, can be really helpful. I will say, don't get too in your own head about this. Your elevator pitch should be kind of conversational to some extent. It's a good way of introducing yourself to people that you speak with, and more to the point, even outside of an interview context, it's a good tool to have from a networking perspective. So regardless of like interview preparation, availability, anything like that, your elevator pitch, you'll want to make sure that you have in the back pocket just in the event that you get into a networking context. Can be really helpful, of course, as well with digital networking via platforms like LinkedIn, etc. Lastly here, make sure that you have a notebook of some key situations that you've encountered through your work experience, and this will kind of help to jog your memory in those interview settings. So kind of where we just walked through that STAR setting, those examples can be really helpful to kind of get your brain in the right space to answer questions in the STAR method. One of the hardest things, especially if you're just now learning about this and learning more about what there is out there and what to expect from an interview context, it is kind of getting your brain in the framing to answer in the STAR method. So one of the best ways to do that, of course, is making sure that you have those situations ready to talk through, but two, just practicing them. Like really practicing that helps to get your brain in the right space and kind of in the zone once you are in that interview context. Of course, this is all well and good. We've gone through, pre, during, and now we want to talk about post-interview etiquette. This is in some ways equally important. Um, you'll want to make sure that you are continuing to express that excitement, that enthusiasm to work with the organization, even after the interview. So first thing, and you should do this basically every interview that you have, try to make sure that you get a viable contact from the person that you're interviewing with to be able to email them a thank you note within 24 hours. Oftentimes this can come up pretty organically at the end of the interview. Just asking them to stay in touch. You can ask if you can connect with them on LinkedIn. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But just giving or gaining the ability to send a thank you note can go a long way. Again, it's very, very important from terms of like post-interview etiquette to go ahead and share that. Share your thoughts on the interview and share, kind of where you're at, of course, after the fact. Equally important is making sure that you reflect on that interview. So take the time to check in with yourself and think through what went well and what could be improved. A lot of times, this element of self-reflection is one of the harder things to do because you're fresh out of it, and so especially if you have some anxiety, it's still kind of raw. In the event that you need to take some time, a couple hours afterwards to decompress, chill out, just make sure that before the end of the day or evening, etc., you've taken the time to think back on the interview, think through the questions that were asked of you. Oh, that was a great question. I should prepare for that a little bit more next time, just to make sure that even if you don't get this job, you're more primed for success to win your next interview. Of course, the follow-up, if they gave you a time frame and they haven't followed up with you in that given time frame, it is perfectly acceptable to send a quick follow-up email. Again, if in the event that you don't have email contact information from the person who coordinated the interview on your behalf, it's also perfectly acceptable to reach out via LinkedIn or social media in the event that you have that in lieu of an email. Connecting on LinkedIn, of course, if appropriate, we do always recommend that you connect with the interviewer. Again, this is a way that you can expand your network and make an impact beyond the scope of just the interview that you're in. Oftentimes people, especially if you're looking to go to work in a specific career path, people know people, right? Especially folks who have been in the industry for a little bit. And so in the event that you make a great impression with an interviewer and you have a great dialogue with them and they're comfortable connecting with you on LinkedIn, and in the event that you don't get a job with them, it's a great way to kind of open up the dialogue of like, hey, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Is there any pointers that you can give me or any kind of like direction that you could point me to make sure that I'm a little bit more prepared to win the next interview? And oftentimes, again, people are people, right? Especially on the one hand, some folks will be busy. They may not be able to immediately answer. But on the other hand, especially if you've made a good connection with them, they're very likely to kind of give you some key pointers and kind of get you in the right direction to be prepared to win the next one. Of course, preparation for next steps. So in the event that they've given you a timeline and they've said like, hey, we're going to be setting up, follow-up interviews next week, et cetera, or if they've given you an expectation of an assessment, you want to make sure that you are routinely checking your email for communications, make sure that you are doing your due diligence to keep your skill set sharp, of course, make sure that you're taking the time to continually review your experience, feel more and more confident with it. And then, of course, if there is an assessment involved and you do receive that, make sure that you complete it as soon as possible. Oftentimes what happens is there are follow-up steps involved in an interview process, whether it be an assessment or something along those lines. And for whatever reason, the candidate may just not notice it comes through or may get busy, tied up, etc. Sometimes waiting too long on those assessments can disqualify you. So especially if they've given you an expectation of any kind of follow-up steps. Make sure that you're monitoring all of your communication channels closely for any indication of what to do next. Of course, we talked about this previously, but in the event that you do not get the job, and you have a great connection, great rapport with somebody, it is more than acceptable. I would recommend it in most cases, honestly, to ask for the feedback to improve. Like, hey, what are some key things that you think maybe I was missing in this scenario? Were there maybe answers that weren't as robust? Were there areas that maybe my technical skills weren't up to snuff? Is there anything that I should check out to kind of continue to improve? Again, a lot of times some people will be busy, so give people grace, right? Especially when you're seeking feedback like this. But I will say people are people. If you've established great rapport with them and you've gotten a great, had a great conversation with them, essentially, it's much more likely that they will kind of offer some insight as to like how you can maybe get to a little bit more robust of a skill set. And sometimes the other important piece of this is they may not have a lot of feedback to give. It may just be that, hey, it's not necessarily anything wrong with your experience or your profile. We just kind of decided that this position would be better suited with somebody with possibly a little bit more of the same experience. And so that happens just as frequently, I would say. So I encourage, especially if you're seeking feedback, don't take it too personally. There is a lot of competition, of course, in the job market currently. And so just being prepared for whatever answer that you get will be very important to, of course, managing your own independent mental state as you continue to apply for positions. So give the person grace, obviously, in responding, and then give yourself a lot of grace. It takes a lot out of you to be an active job seeker, I would say. And so making sure that you're taking the time to check in with yourself, be ready to receive that feedback, all that good stuff is very important. And then, of course, celebrating your efforts. This bleeds directly into that, right? Making sure you take the time to acknowledge the hard work that you put into the process. While it definitely can sting, especially if you don't get the job, it is very important to make sure that you are managing, where you're at that given moment in time. So if you're not feeling great afterwards, sometimes it's important to take a break from the job search a little bit, especially if you have the opportunity to. Sometimes it can be equally important, or it can be rejuvenating in some sense, to get some great feedback from somebody, like, here's a specific thing that you could work on. And then you find that and you start to work on it and you find, oh, I can absolutely do this, right? So I think just making sure that you take the time to check in with yourself, celebrate the hard work that you put into it, and brace yourself for the continued job search is just as important as any other step of pre, during, or post interview preparation here. So we've talked a lot about AI, a couple different tools that are immediately available to you. These are just a few ways that I would say that you can leverage AI to practice for these interviews. Kind of simulating those scenarios with an AI partner, and it can be a lot of them. There's Gemini, ChatGPT, etc. But you'll kind of want to ask, basically you'll give the context to the AI to role play as a hiring manager and give them the title. And oftentimes it can be even more helpful to give them the job description, because what they'll do from there is kind of parse a job description for kind of some key questions that you might expect to get asked within that interview. And then from there, you'll get the ability to answer the question, of course, first and foremost, and then prompt the AI to like, hey, give feedback on that answer. What should I change? Is there anything that, would be a good or bad edit to this kind of response? And then just make sure that you are carefully vetting the AI, because sometimes I will say it won't always give you a human-centric answer, if that makes sense. There's a sort of pseudo definition of a correct answer, and the AI's had a lot of the times when you pose it with these. And if you don't take it with a grain of salt and try to like read between the lines a little bit, it can sometimes be not super helpful in the feedback that it would give. So one way that it would be helpful, though, is transcribing your standard responses into star responses. So let's say in the same scenario, you've kind of asked the AI to role play as the hiring manager. You can then draft up your response and say, rephrase this response back to me using the star method to answer the question. And then from there, it will kind of walk you through the answer and how it would articulate basically the same answer that you gave it. That's a great way, I would say, because again, this is more your own words at this point, and it's just kind of rephrasing them as opposed to treating it as a binary and just the output that you get from the system as like the golden standard. And then lastly, of course, using AI to research the company and the role is a great way to leverage it on the front end. Research can be very time intensive. And again, you'll want to spot check the sources and things like that, especially as you're talking with any kind of AI program. It will give like links and sources to things like that. So make sure that you're clicking on those links, make sure that you're double checking the sources that it's providing you. But Googling a company, getting on the LinkedIn, etc., all of that can be very time intensive. In the event that you're trying to be a little bit more efficient with your time, you can go ahead, paste in the job description, and then you can you basically get the AI to be like, hey, give me this company's website, any key accomplishments that they've done recently, their LinkedIn presence, and then you can also ask like follow-up questions off the back of that, right? So like, also, can you give me 3 questions that the interview or that I might be able to ask the interviewer based on the job posting? So you can, after you've given the AI the context and it pulls all the basic information from you, it'll then pull from that context, and then you can ask it, what are some things that I should be asking based on the job posting, based off of key accomplishments recently, etc. The key note here that I will say, and you've heard me say it a couple times now, treat it with a grain of salt, right? So take the time to review all of the responses and everything and the output that the AI is giving you back. It's not a way to really replace the preparation that you've been putting in up to this point, and it's still heavily encouraged to take the time to make sure that you are manually reviewing both the responses and like the sources that it's giving you. But it's a great way to create efficiencies and accelerate that improvement. So it's the way that I would recommend using AI is kind of like both as a coach and an assistant, where it can basically go out, collate all the key information about both the company and the job. And then from there, you can use it as a coach to be kind of like coach you about the position that you're interviewing for as well. One key tool that we do want to highlight here, of course, from our partners with Google is Interview Warmup. This is a great way to, especially if you've recently completed a Google Career Certificate, great way to essentially go in and kind of talk through, what fields you're going to be practicing interviews for. So in the event that you've recently completed a certificate for project management, you can go ahead and click on that, and it'll give you some key questions. From there, it'll actually give you the opportunity to answer vocally, right? So you'll have the top opportunity to talk through your answers, and it will also give you feedback on those answers. So it'll record your response, basically kind of talk through like, hey, this is what worked really well. This is what you maybe want to change a little bit. It's a great tool to be able to really efficiently talk through one, your experience, but 2, get some validation on if you're going the right direction with how you're answering questions. I know we did talk about, of course, it records your voice. There is the opportunity to type in answers as well in the event that you're not comfortable with that. So yeah, I would highly recommend using it on the front end there. Great way to gain some additional exposure to the interviewing context. This next slide here also has some additional context around the interview warm-up tool, and can kind of give you some key things to do around like interview etiquette, so like before, during, and after. And then of course we'll give you some insight as to specific questions to expect. We already talked about behavioral questions, but in the event that you are heading into a more technical discipline, i.e. like a data analyst role, it'll kind of give you some expectation of what questions you could get asked within that interview context. So maybe key questions around your proficiency with SQL, Excel, Tableau, or any other key data analytics languages, anything like that. And then of course, background questions are one other thing that it can ask. It will be, background questions will kind of have some overlap with behavioral questions in a lot of ways. But the way that they're phrased is a little bit different. They're much more pointed. We'll ask you specific questions about your experience. But yeah, again, would highly recommend checking out Interview Warmup. It is a great tool to kind of gain some confidence and proficiency in an interview setting before you actually kind of land in the situation yourself. And then of course here we have a cheat sheet. I believe this is also listed in the content section, but this is kind of a couple key questions that you can expect generally in an interview setting, and then how you should go about answering them. So would highly recommend taking the time to review these. Some great insight in here. Our interview prep modules on Career Circle also go through a lot of the same content. So would be really helpful to review both of these in tandem with the interview warm-up tool as well.
All righty, Ethan. I just want the audience to know, like I've already told him how great he is, but can we give like a wonderful virtual hand of applause for Ethan? That 45 minutes of amazingness. I know that you all are leaving here with so many more tools in your toolbox. Now is the time to get your questions answered by the guru himself. Let's get into it. Question number one. For phone screenings that you're not expecting, how can you ground yourself quickly so you can have a conversation?
Great question, and it's a really good question because that's kind of the pace of play how a lot of phone interviews will first take shape. Um, Not to say that you get caught flat-footed necessarily, but it can just move a lot quicker than you would initially expect. The best way to immediately ground yourself and make sure that you are prepared for the interview is to make sure that you find quiet space essentially before the interview itself. So even if it's like call it 15, 10 minutes before, take the time to clear your surroundings, take away distractions, all that good stuff, and just do detailed, in-depth review of your experience. Center yourself kind of on yourself. That way, it's a lot easier for you to talk through your experience. This is one of those things where it can be difficult based on the situation that you're in as well. So let's say like you're at work, you get a call from a recruiter, hey, do you have 15 minutes for me? That can be a bit more difficult. So in the event that there is a harder time scheduling with that, you can also say like, hey, this actually isn't a great time. Is there any way that you could give me a call at XYZ time or XYZ date? Coordinate with the person as well. It's important to make sure that you feel adequately prepared to win the interview too. But conversely, again, it is a competitive market right now. So make sure that you don't kick the can, so to speak, too far and impact your chances of having a fair shake for an interview. So I would say at most, if you need to delay the interview, try to give yourself like a 24, 48 hour buff. But in the event that you are able to quickly access a quiet space, access some area to like go through your experience in a detailed manner, that's how I would recommend grounding yourself.
Awesome, Ethan. My next question. For my in person interview with the Chief Operating Officer, they provided an overview or an outline of high level initiatives, expectations for the first 30 to 60 days, and an overview of current systems. Besides bringing my resume and questions, what else should I be allowed to bring to the interview?
So I think I understand the question. It's more in the lens of they. Can you repeat that for me one more time? I want to make
I
sure that I'm.
got you. No worries at all. For my in person interview with the Chief Operating Officer, they provided an outline of high level initiatives, expectations for the first 30 to 60 days, and an overview of current systems. Besides bringing my resume and questions, what else would I be allowed to bring to the interview?
I think from bringing it content to the interview perspective, that's really you'll have your bases covered with the resume and questions. What you'll want to think more of is what kind of questions to ask. So they will outline, of course, like the expectations, everything of the role. Take each of those expectations, et cetera, to their logical conclusion, right? So let's say they give you a metric of you need to have XYZ amount of call volume or XYZ amount of projects impacted. What goes into completing those projects? What goes into getting those calls completed? Ask questions about the day-to-day logistics of the position itself. That way you are armed with a greater understanding of the position coming out of it, because it's a great it's a great practice that the company is exercising here to give you kind of like key expectations of what outlines a role, but it's more important for you as the candidate to understand fully what will be expected of you to get to those goals, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And let me ask you this. Let me take a liberty here, because just looking at everything that is being gone over in the interview itself, that's pretty dense information. And so, a follow up question to that from myself would be: is it frowned upon to bring maybe a notebook or some sort of something in order to be able to write notes of what's being conveyed, that can potentially be reviewed later?
No, not at all. Thank you for slowing me down there a little bit, because in my head, when we're talking about bringing questions, in my mind, I'm thinking a notebook a notebook with questions. Absolutely, bring a notebook. It shows a great level of preparation, and just ready to take notes essentially about the role itself. Because again, you don't want to, as much as we like to put a lot of trust in our own memories, you don't want to put yourself in a position where they give you key information and you can't recall it readily. So take the time. Yeah, definitely make sure that you bring a notebook, write your questions down in it, and then feel free to reference those throughout the interview or take notes as the interviewer is sharing context with you.
Absolutely. And then is there anything that is frowned upon? Like, let's just say we have someone who is in need of accommodations and maybe doesn't write in a notebook, but may record something or may utilize some sort of other technology. Is there anything that you know of that could be potentially frowned upon bringing into an interview to retain information?
That's a great question. Um, I wouldn't say it would be immediately frowned upon, but it may create additional dialogue if you have not set the context with the interviewer prior to the conversation. So it's important in those cases where you might be using alternative methods to take notes that you let the interviewer know prior to like setting up your solution. And that way you're both on the same page as the interview goes on.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for answering those questions. How do you adjust the elevator pitch if you are changing careers?
Great question. So it's a lot in that case about identifying transferable skills. So things more along the lines of like, obviously, I have a strong recruiting background at this stage. It's more if I were to move into a data analyst role, as an example, I would one still highlight my 8 years of recruiting experience, but I would think about all the ways that I have leveraged data to make informed decisions. And that how that would qualify me uniquely for a position. So I myself, as a digital recruiting manager with 8 years of experience in the recruiting field, I've leveraged tools like SQL, Excel, Power Query to extract key data insights from candidate engagement and make sure that businesses are informed of the impacts that they're having to a given candidate population. So that's one way that you can do it, like thinking through the work that you've done up to this point and how it might relate to a given career field will get you much further from an elevator pitch perspective.
Absolutely. And let me just say, I want to provide this bit of caveat. We are at 9 minutes to the end of today's webinar and panel discussion. And so I want to make sure that you all are aware we may not be able to get to all of the amazing questions that you all have. But the wonderful thing is, Ethan, myself, many members of our Career Circle staff are a part of LinkedIn. And so please feel free to connect to be able to get some of those questions answered if we aren't able to do it on today's webinar. Okay, back to the questions. I was recently told by a hiring team to include my volunteer experience that's relevant to the job. How would you recommend putting this on a resume?
That's a great question. I generally, from a volunteer experience perspective, there's one of two ways that you can do it. You can either highlight it in line chronologically with your work experience and just highlight that it was a volunteer role, kind of giving yourself like a volunteer title, so to speak, with the organization that you were working with. That's one great way of doing it. Again, just kind of keeps it in line, makes it easy for the person to digest and like see the work that you were doing with that org. The other way that you could do it is break up a quick section between kind of like your skills and your professional experience and just title it volunteer experience. And then similarly, you'll just highlight the work that you did with that organization and how long you were doing that work for.
Ethan, I'm going to ask you to do a speed round with me because we have some really good questions that I want to try to get to. All right. So let's try to do 60 seconds or less. If the recruiter is not getting back to you regarding next steps or feedback, is it appropriate to reach directly to the hiring manager?
Great question. I would say it's very heavily dependent on the context of the interview. In the event that you feel that you have a rapport with them, so let's say you were able to connect with them on LinkedIn, etc., I would say it's not inappropriate to just leave a quick note. Just say, hey, just wanted to check in, see how things are going with the interview process, if there's any additional information that I can provide. I would phrase it as that, as opposed to like more like kind of like, hey, what's going on with the interview, right? So just be open to the dialogue and try to make it as conversational as possible, as opposed to like transactional, what's going on with this.
Absolutely. Next question. I was recently hired for a job with a very delayed start date. Any guidelines on how to keep a communication channel open?
I would say I would heavily encourage you to work a lot with your recruiter, even if it makes sense either on a semi-daily or a weekly touch point, to just follow up with the recruiter to say like, hey, just want to let you know I'm still, actively waiting on details for the position. Please let me know if there's any change or anything like that. And just set the expectation with the recruiter that you will check in as well. That way they're expecting your communication, and they know to follow up with you as quickly as possible in the event that there's any delay.
Okay. In the event a case study is required for the next round of interviews, what are some tools and ways to stand out if there is a case study
Mhm.
required for the next round of interviews?
It's a really good question. I would lean heavily into the tools that are most heavily mentioned in the job description. So let's say they need a case study for, let's say that the company is largely using like Tableau for data visualization or something like that. And you're essentially kind of putting together the data and then trying to visualize it. I would make sure that you are leveraging, the tools that you'll be using on the day-to-day in the job. So let's say they need Excel as a primary data processing thing. Use Excel to process, clean, visualize all the data, and then to load the data into Tableau to visualize and make compelling like case study dashboards, et cetera, to provide those insights. That way they can clearly see this is how this person would use the tools that we are currently using.
Awesome. Are candidates that have been on the market for a long period of time, thinking a year or more, less desirable than someone who has been on the market for a short period of time? And there was a second part to that question, but you just answered it. So I'll repeat again that first part. Are candidates that have been on the market for a long period of time less desirable than someone who's been on the market for a shorter period of time?
And I wouldn't say so. No, it's much more heavily driven by expertise. It can create questions in the interview context, but as long as you just are truthful and honest with them in the interview, there's no indication that you're necessarily less desirable as a candidate as opposed to a more recent candidate on the market.
For memory purposes, is it a good idea to discuss most recent positions with behavioral questions?
Yes, generally. So most recent positions are what I would lean on more heavily for behavioral question or behavioral interview questions. Mostly because it's fresher in your mind. It's a lot easier to articulate the things in that STAR method than it might be to articulate a much older position. That said, in the event that you are in the interview context and a situation quickly pops into your head from one of your older positions, there's no harm in using that as the example either. They might follow up and say, is there an example that you could use from your more recent position? Sometimes interviewers will even like tee it up with like, hey, in your experience with XYZ company, Career Circle, have you ever had this kind of situation essentially? And then that'll tee you up to answer any follow-up questions. So there's no inherently right or wrong there, but for the purposes of your personal memory, oftentimes it's easier to remember the things that have happened more recently.
Absolutely. What if I'm being interviewed for a role that I don't have prior experience in?
Say that one more time.
What if I am being interviewed for a role that I don't have prior experience in?
If you are being interviewed for a role that you don't have prior experience in, it's most heavily encouraged to lean on those transferable skills that we talked about previously. Even if you don't strictly have experience in the role that you're targeting, you might have used key skills that would be relevant for the role in your prior positions. So take the time to review your experience and compare it against the job description and extract bits of your career where you use those key competencies at. Become prepared to talk through that extensively in the interview. It's pretty likely in that context where you might not have your experience readily apparent that they will ask a lot of questions about how and why you were using those skills in the roles that you had previously.
Okay, this is the last question. Last question. What about job fairs? What if I'm lucky enough to get pulled into an on the spot interview? How should I respond?
Great question. If you are lucky enough to be pulled in the on-spot interview, first of all, awesome. You have great experience. Again, you're in that situation for a reason, right? So that situation in and of itself should inspire a little bit of confidence in you. Secondly, I would go prepared, especially if you're going to a networking event or something like that with the aim of connecting with professionals in the space that you're targeting. I would be prepared prior to the job fair for something like that to happen. So make sure that you take the time, similar to how we talked about, pre-interview prep previously, that you're arriving early, taking the time to check in with yourself, review your experience, kind of think through questions. You won't have as much opportunity to think through questions, but you can come up with some general questions that you might ask any person that you work with or any organization that you would work with. Take the time to do that preparation prior to going into that networking event, and then that will help you feel a little bit more confident once you're actually in the on the spot interview, so to speak.
Thank you so much, Ethan, and thank you so much, audience. Please, I want to make sure that you're staying until the end because we have some additional information that we'll be sending post-event, which will include a recording as well as all the resources we spoke about today. You can access our event survey by using the QR code earlier in the presentation or by locating it in your email. We'll be doing a raffle with all respondents, and one of you will receive a Career Circle tote bag. Make sure to like and follow us on our socials to stay up to date on all platform updates. Once again, we thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you all leave here today feeling empowered and ready to ace your interview with confidence. We've had so much fun today. Please join us for our next webinar, which will be held July 15th, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as well as our next virtual career fair the same week on July 17th from 12 until 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can view all events and register on careercircle.com/events. Thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.